Our next speaker is a best-selling author and international speaker, a world-renowned expert on Generation Y and Generation Z. He uses his knowledge to equip educators, coaches, teachers, leaders, parents, and other adults to impart practical life and leadership skills to young adults that will help them navigate through life. Please use the question and answer feature throughout the session to ask your questions. Tim will answer a few questions at the end of his presentation. So please welcome Dr. Tim Elmore, CEO and founder of Growing Leaders.
Hey, good afternoon, educators. I'm trusting you can hear me. Do you notice I have been given nap time to speak to you today? I'm going to do my best to keep you awake. Let me tell you what the ground rules are the next 45 to 60 minutes. I'm going to lay out some content, not on how to lead yourself during this strange time, but how to lead your students. So we're talking about Generation Z. I'm going to be very practical. I'm not going to end until I give you some hopefully creative ideas that you can employ as you teach and lead them. Also parent them. I know some of you are parents and educators. So be scribbling down notes. Some of the time you may want to scribble down a question. As Tony just said, we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. So I'm going to share my screen and we're going to jump in right now. Let me pull this up real quick. Okay. All right. I'm trusting you can all see that. Drew, let me know if you cannot. My topic that I've kind of given myself in light of what the request was leading anxious students in a most anxious time. We have called many of our partners during this time. We partner with thousands of schools across the world, actually. We've talked to teachers, we've talked to kids, and the most common statement we've heard from teachers, or really question, is how can I lead anxious students when I'm anxious myself? And that's often the paramount issue at the time. But we do live in a very, very different time. In fact, it's a time we've only seen, a type of time we've only seen in the movies or on some blockbuster Netflix series where some pandemic hits and we're all in a whole new world. But indeed we are. In fact, let me ask you a question as we kind of kick things off here. Would you have believed it? There we go. Would you have believed it if someone had told you just 3 months ago that within a month, schools will be absolutely shut down, that all public gatherings, including sports games, would be canceled? Hundreds of millions globally would be out of work. We'd end spring season with no championships. We'd say goodbye to seniors with no in-person graduation ceremonies. I'm not sure what happened in Nebraska, but in our state and most of the others we've worked with, there's been kind of drive-bys. We'd be working remotely with colleagues, parents, and students. And then finally, people would be uncertain about jobs and income in the future. It's just a strange time. Some people are calling Generation Z the Coronials, as opposed to the Millennials, because they've been this generation who will always remember in 2020 that grew up with a coronavirus. And this changed everything. It took away the senior year, or at least the spring part of the senior year, from high school seniors. And you and I are now called upon to be caring adults who have some sense of wisdom to know how to lead kids through this very, very different time. So let me give you very rapidly some data we pulled up since March when this pandemic sent us all home. Specifically, I'm going to answer the question, how has COVID-19 increased the challenges of Generation Z? Now, if you know anything about Gen Z, first of all, you need to know they are the generation that really only remembers the 21st century. They don't remember Columbine High School. They don't remember some of the things we remember from the 90s or the 80s or the 70s, and in my case, even the 60s. Generation Z, as a generation, has experienced more mental health issues than any generation we've ever measured. More anxiety and anxiety disorders, more depression, more panic attacks. It's just been a perfect storm of elements. I don't think the kids are bad or evil or even weak. I just think culture's done a number on them. And now we have to pivot and say, how do we lead them to become the adults they need to be upon graduation? So real quick, let me answer this question. I got 4 things for you to jot down. How has COVID-19 increased the challenges of Generation Z? First of all, society's uncertainty has only added to their anxiety. You can imagine, can't you? In the business world, the term VUCA has been shared for decades now. VUCA stands for we live in a world that's volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And I would say those apply to educators, schools, and kids today. It's a time that's volatile. It's shifting all the time. Remember back in March and April, we kept thinking the news changed completely on us in a day or two. It's uncertain. They don't know if that internship's going to work out this summer. Probably won't. Or that job interview that they had lined up, or that job itself they've lined up. So anxiety levels are even higher now. Number 2, humans are social creatures, and we're all in isolation right now. So you know this is how God designed us. We are social creatures. Human beings need other human beings. And while some of you are introverts and you welcome quarantine times like this, by and large, we just need each other to be healthy. And right now, socially and emotionally, this is not a healthy time. So again, it's just added to the challenge for Gen Z. 3, scarcity often fills our mindsets. Problems feel overwhelming. So years ago, Stephen Covey, the great author, introduced us to the terms abundance mindset and scarcity mindset. It's 2 different mindsets. The abundance mindset just believes, well, if we lost some here, we're going to gain some here. It's an optimistic mindset. It's a mindset that believes life is going to get better if we work hard. The scarcity mindset says things are running out. I may lose everything. And very, very often, partly because we're watching the news all day, or we're looking at our phones where social media is blowing up with both a pandemic and protests and panic attacks, it's not helped the abundance mindset at all. So just know you might see a kid that's normally well-adjusted in a scarcity mindset. And then lastly, the 4th thing I'd share, future career prospects are now uncertain and troubling. So you're all CTE educators, at least most of you are. Just know that all the things they've been hearing you talk about and experiencing with you in the classroom or outside or in the factory or wherever you've gone just seems to be evaporating. It may not be, but it seems like it is. Again, emotions are real and feelings are facts in terms of what they perceive as reality. So I share this with you if for no other reason to make sure that you enter this next school year with great empathy. I know sometimes you feel like they need more grit and they need more resilience and they need a better work ethic. I get all that. I agree. But what we've got to do is start where they are and build a bridge to where they need to go. Can I say that again? We need to start where they are and build a bridge to where they need to go. So let's take these kids, not the ones we wish for, but the ones we have in front of us this fall, and say, all right, let's make the very most of this situation and let's build the best version of themselves out of these students in the end. All right, so let's move on. Our job, of course, right now is to pivot. You know what pivot means, right? And if you play basketball, a pivot is where you keep one foot in place on that basketball court, and without traveling, you move the other foot. That's what we need to do. We need to have one foot in place, okay, solid on the ground, making sure we hold on to those timeless principles and values we know will work in any day. But then we pivot with the other foot, meaning we're moving around, we're adjusting to the new realities. And that's just the need of the hour. So having said that, I want to give you a metaphor that I think will be really helpful to hold in your head all through the summer as you get ready for the fall. I am supposed to be in Egypt right now. Actually, I was supposed to just have gotten back to be with you in Nebraska right now, but I didn't go to Egypt. Instead, we did some virtual meetings and we're planning an in-person conference with educators this fall. But it made me reminisce about my last trip to Cairo. I love going to that country. It's a mixture of old and new. And on the final day of my stay, last time I was in Egypt, the 8 of us on our team got to hop in a felucca, which is a small sailboat, and we sailed down the Nile River for about 90 minutes. It was surreal. Here was the Nile River, this ancient place where we read about and heard about in history books. Moses, Abraham, Joseph, all those biblical characters were on the Nile River. Moses was put in a basket, if I remember correctly. But my point is, there we were in this very historical place. But the historical place turned into a hysterical place, because you see, there were 8 of us in this boat with 1 sailor, and the winds were really volatile that day. I mean, they were contrary winds, and that was an understatement. It was blowing hard, and our sailor had taken his shirt off and his shoes off so he could get around very quickly. And I mean to tell you, for 90 minutes that day, he was pulling on ropes, pushing sails, twisting poles, trying to make sure that those very, very harsh contrary winds still got us to the destination. And that's my point. I love the picture of leadership I saw that day on that felucca. In fact, let's apply it to you and me right now. When sailors are experiencing high winds, what do? Well, you and I are going to be in the same boat, pardon the pun, okay? We're getting contrary winds right now. We did not plan on the coronavirus hitting. We did not plan on racial unrest and protest. We did not plan on these anxiety levels with these kids who have smartphones in their hands. We didn't plan any of this. In fact, we planned to teach the way we taught 20 years ago, but it ain't working. So very quickly, I noticed that day on the felucca that the sailor did not shake his fist and get mad at the wind, yelling that it wasn't compliant with his wishes. And yet I know adults that are doing that. They're frustrated and angry at the current situation, and why is this way, and this is not what I signed up for. Folks, that's not going to help at all. It's not. I also didn't see that day on that felucca the sailor just sit down and visit with us and give up on it. In other words, he didn't say, well, too bad, guys, I'm sorry the wind isn't cooperating, so I'll just sit down and we'll see where we go. I know some adults that have pretty much given it up. They've given up on kids today. They've given up on trying to accomplish the goal they had in the beginning. The destination will not be reached. Instead, our sailor that day worked himself into a sweat for 90 minutes. You see where I'm going with this? Because he was adjusting the sails every moment of that trip to make sure the very contrary winds got us to the place they needed to get us to. So very rapidly, sailors have to decide how to respond to high winds. We can yell at the wind, but that's not going to help. We can surrender to the wind, but that's not going to help. What we've got to do is adjust the sails. So the pessimist complains about the wind. The optimist assumes the wind is going to change, but the leader adjusts the sails. And again, I'm just your friend. I'm not your boss. I'm not your supervisor. I'm not your mentor, but for 1 hour, can I be your coach? We've got to adjust the sails. We need to display that in 2020, we were the best caring people we could be, who care about the next generation and about the skill sets they're going to need to pick up while under our care. And we adjust those sails and actually use them. Our goal shouldn't be just help them graduate and get out of here. Our goal should be, how could these tough winds right now actually make them stronger for the world they're going to graduate into and need to lead one day? So, context explains conduct. You all know this, don't you? If you've got kids of your own, you know that understanding what just happened in their life may explain their behavior right now at dinner time, or what they just experienced earlier in the day or the week will explain what's happening right now. I didn't say context excuses conduct. There may be no excuse for bad behavior, but it does explain it. So let's take a couple of minutes and do something that I think will give context to behavior. In the Generation Z book, not unlike my Marching Off the Mat book, which I went through with you years ago, I just released a book called Generation Z about 5-6 months ago. And I put a chart in that book where I talk about the realities of Generation Z, and I compare and contrast their realities to yours and mine. Okay, so let me show you the chart. This is actually just part of the chart. We only have about 5 or 6 minutes for this, but I really think it's going to be helpful. So fasten your seatbelts. The little ribbon you see across the top of this slide from left to right are the 5 generations that are still influencing the world right now. There are 6 of them alive right now. So the oldest generation would be the builder generation, born between 1929 and 1945. And then right after World War II came the baby boomer generation. Okay. There was a boom of babies when the soldiers came back from World War II. And then the baby busters, or Generation X, 1965 to 82. Many of you watching must be Xers. All right. That generation started, by the way, with the public introduction of the birth control pill. So instead of a boom, it was a bust. In fact, if you add on top of that Roe v. Wade in 1973, you have a shrinking population, not a booming population. So Gen X was very different than the boomers. And then along came the millennial generation, the people born in the 80s and 90s. Many of you watching are probably millennials. And then finally, you have Generation Z. I have them starting right about the turn of the century because I think so much pivoted at the 21st century. Now, some social scientists have Gen Z starting as early as 1995, some 97, some 99. I think right about the turn of the century is when things really pivoted. Now, so if you'll go with me on this journey, let's talk for a minute about the narrative each generation brought with them as they moved from backpack to briefcase, okay? As they went from childhood to adulthood, what was the story they had in their head, the paradigm that governed their mindset. So go back to 85, 90 years ago. My parents' generation, their mantra was, just be grateful you got a job. My father turns 90 years old this year. The first 10 years of his life were the Great Depression, and then the next 5, World War II. So, I mean, it was a tough time. So he grew up grateful and frugal, conservative. And I can't tell you how many times he said, just be grateful you have a job. I said, Dad, I started the company. Just be grateful you got a job. Okay. That was that. And by the way, they always say, save the wrapping paper at Christmas. We'll use it next year. All right. And turn the lights off when you leave the room and shut the door. We're not going to air conditioning the whole neighborhood. All right. That's that generation. Love them. Boomers come along and I gave them the life paradigm. I deserve better because baby boomers felt like they were entitled to a better life than mom and dad had back in the Depression. It was a time of expansion, not depression. When the Xers came through, it was keep it real. In fact, that was even a phrase that became a thing during the Xers' childhood years. So look at the childhood years, 65 to 82. During the late 60s and the 70s, life was harder that time. There was an economic recession. There was the Vietnam War. There was the Watergate scandal. Gas prices and gas lines were huge. So even though Gen X were just kids back then, they looked at the adult generation and saw a growing skepticism in the adults. And they, as kids, grew up a little more cynical themselves. So keep it real. Don't tell me life is wonderful. It's not wonderful. The millennials came along. I gave millennials the life paradigm. Life is a cafeteria. And here's why. By the time millennials came of age, we had entered a world of digital customization. Things were online and you can customize them. And so they were beginning to tailor their life like they tailor a meal at a cafeteria, where you grab a little bit of roast beef and mashed potatoes and Jell-O. Here's some examples. So my 2 kids are both millennials, Bethany and Jonathan, 32 and 28. They stopped buying CDs to get music years ago. Why would they get a CD? There might be 6 songs they don't even like on that CD. They get 1 song at a time. They form their own playlist on Spotify or iTunes. It's a buffet. They make educational decisions. They graduate from high school and go to 3 or 4 different colleges for 1 degree. One of them's overseas. They'll make spiritual decisions this way. It is not uncommon. A little bit of Jesus, a little bit of Buddha, a little bit of Oprah, shake it together. I've made it my own faith. But life seems to be a cafeteria. Now, for Gen Z, as we do both quantitative and qualitative research, the focus groups we've hosted in several states across the country, the phrase that I would give them as they become 18 years old and they begin to become adults is simply this: I'm coping and hoping. So they're still hopeful because they're a youth generation, but there's much more of I'm coping with the harsh realities I've got right now. I'm struggling with mental illness. I'm going to see a therapist. I've got anxiety, depression, not every one of them, but the stigma for going to see a counselor has gone away. At least a lot of it's gone away compared to my generation. Now, here's what I want you to notice very quickly about this chart. If you go back to the left side for each of these generations, notice this. The builder generation was a generation of caution. The baby boomers, confidence. The Xers, caution. The millennials, confidence. Gen Z, caution. It's almost like a pendulum is swinging back and forth as each generation gives way to the next. And they reflect the economies they're moving into, they're graduating into, the shared tragedies, the shared heroes, the shared music, the shared TV programs. All of those things shape us the first 20 years of our life. And I just want you to know that whereas 10 or 15 years ago, a millennial kid might have been overconfident, you might have needed to say, hey, wait, Josh, you might not be the vice president by the time you're 25 and you get your own car for the company. For Gen Z, you might have to say something quite the opposite, like, hey, you can do this. I believe in you. I think it's in you to do this. So just know we may need to change the way we lead and the very narrative we carry as we lead them. Now, let me do a couple of others real fast. I want to talk about attitude toward authority. This might be helpful for some of you, and it might even spark a question. Would anybody agree with me that maybe attitude toward authority might have changed in 90 years? Just maybe? Okay. So let's go back in time, 90 years to my parents' generation. For that generation, it was respect them. Okay. My mom and dad taught me just respect authority. You respect the mayor, you respect the police, you respect the president. Even if you didn't vote for him, you respect him. That's just what I was taught by that generation. For my generation, baby boomers, it was replace them. We just thought we'd take over. Thank you very much. Okay. For the Xers, it was endure them. We got to put up with these idiots, you know? And I don't mean to be unkind, but Gen X was more cynical, more jaded, more skeptical about what was going on. For millennials, it's choose them. Remember, life is a cafeteria. So here's a picture of what I'm talking about. I don't know, 12 or 13 years ago, I was on a major university campus, and I heard a number of students, undergrad students, say to me, well, yeah, he's my professor, but he's not my mentor. And what they meant by that was, I have to take that class, but I'm choosing the people that I let pour into me. I'm still in control. Life's a cafeteria, and I'm choosing what I have to eat. For Gen Z, while they're anxious, many of them, and struggling mentally right now, they have a smartphone in their hand, and they feel very empowered by that smartphone. So their attitude toward authority, and again, this is not every single Gen Z member, but this is the bump part of the bell curve. The attitude toward authority I see most often in them as middle school, high school kids is this: not sure I need them. So Generation Z is asking Google questions they used to ask mom and dad. I mean, you know, they're not having the sex talk at 13 or 12. They're asking Google, and they're finding out at 7 or 8 years old. All I'm saying is it's a different day today, and they feel very empowered. So look at Gen Z vertically here, okay? So the box that says I'm coping and hoping tells you they're saying, I need your help. The box that says, not sure I need them, tells you, I don't know if I need your help. On any given day, you may have this paradoxical interaction with them going, you need me or you don't need me? You need me, you don't need me? Well, the answer is both. There are going to be certain things you're going to have to coach them up on and mentor them. And you're going, did you not learn that when you were 11 years old? And the answer is no, they didn't. But on other cases, you'll be amazed at what they know, what they've done, what they've watched, what they have seen. Okay, real quick, one more category. I felt like this would be timely. I just added it. Response to COVID-19. I feel like based on the life station we're in, we have different responses to this pandemic we're enduring right now. Okay, so let's go back in time. For my dad, my mom passed away already. I miss her to this day, but my dad, who turns 90 this year, here's his attitude. We've been through tough times before. You don't need to get all riled up. And he's sheltering in place, just like he's sheltered in place the last, 15, 20 years, okay? For the baby boomers, it's, my retirement's disappearing. What's going on here? My 401k, what's going on, okay? Not all of them, but it's a little more antsy because we're fixing to retire. For the busters, life is hard, steady she goes. Remember, they're already a little bit skeptical anyway about life not being wonderful. So they're going, okay, this is hard, but I expected hard, okay? For millennials, oh my goodness, what will this do to my dreams? So my daughter Bethany is 32 years old. So her graduating class, she graduated in the thick of the Great Recession about 10 or 11 years ago. And now this is the second recession that has officially begun, according to economists. So within 10 years, she's faced two of them. And she's going, I don't know if I'll ever catch up with my paycheck, with my career steps and moves, and all the things that I had dreamed of have happening. So again, it's just different than they thought. For Gen Z, I believe the best way to summarize it is this. I feel postponed and penalized. So I just finished a book called The Pandemic Population. It's going to be released in August. We just tried to offer very practical research-based ways to lead this generation. It's not out yet, or I'd give it to you, but it'll be released in August. Several of the student focus groups we talked with, they said, I feel penalized. I feel postponed. Isn't that an interesting term? I feel postponed. So again, maybe they will be. In fact, I put a chapter in that new book on what can we learn from the builder and the silent generation who went through tough times. How do they end up with so much grit? Well, the adults led them well back in the 1930s, and we need to do it again. Okay, so that's the chart. I hope at least it gives you context to what we're going through and what we need to do. Now, let me get very practical. I'm trying to keep my eye on the clock here. Let's talk for just a minute about what kids need from leaders in a crisis. So you're leading your classroom, you're leading a cohort of students. Maybe some of you are administrators and you're leading your school. I believe these next few minutes would be my response to the question, if you ask me in a Starbucks, how do I do this? How do I lead these kids and how do I do it well? I think kids need 3 gifts from you, especially in times like this. Number 1 is context. I just shared that word with you, but let me drill down a little bit deeper here. When we get in times that are uncertain and tumultuous, people become uncertain. Their emotions begin to be up and down. The best leaders offer context. And by that, I simply mean, not that you know all the answers, but you say, let me give you some perspective here. We've been through these times in the past, and here's what we did. Here's what we know to do, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we provide just, I don't know, some sort of perspective. I think what they need from you as you begin class time in August or September is start with some context. Don't invalidate their fear or their worry, but just give them context, and that will assure them, okay, he or she, my teacher, has a little more experience than I do. Maybe if they're not afraid, I don't need to be afraid, okay? Number 2, applications. By this, I simply mean, I believe kids can live with uncertainty. In fact, I believe all of us can live with uncertainty. We've been living with uncertainty ever since September 11, 2001, have we not? But what I think we cannot live well without is clarity. Here's where you give them very clear action steps, clear applications that they need to do right now. You need to do A, B, C. And I'm not saying be prescriptive in your leadership. Maybe it's you're giving them outcomes to shoot for, but I just think clarity gives great security in times of uncertainty. So give context, give clear direction. The third one, I think, it may seem very emotional, but it's what they need. They need belief. They need that caring adult that's up front. Even though I know you may be into productivity and results and good grades and GPAs and graduation rates and all the other stuff we measure in school, what I think they need for their heart is an adult up front that says, I believe we're going to make it through this. And we may be stronger than ever having gone through it. This is what leaders have done in the past. Lincoln did it. Churchill did it. Roosevelt did it. This is the kind of thing leaders do. So context, applications, belief. Now, a little bit of trivia here. You may have noticed that if you put those 3 words together, they spell the word cab. So what I've been telling myself lately, whenever I have a student group, I would say, I need to get in a cab to get to my destination. I need to get in a cab to get to my destination. So hop in a cab this fall, context, applications, belief. Okay, let's keep moving. I want to give you a quote real quick from a high school baseball player that I thought was very telling and might be a great case study for us to look at for 2 minutes. Matt is again, a baseball player in high school, And they went to virtual meetings with their coach. And I love what he said in a moment of candor as I was meeting in a focus group with these athletes. He said, I get the feeling our coach doesn't know how to have normal conversations that aren't about baseball. I mean, I like him and everything, but I don't think he's sure about what to do these days. We're like fish out of water. Interesting. Now, what he's really saying is, when I get with my coach in normal times, we talk about X's and O's, we talk about home runs, RBIs, errors, pitches, balls, strikes, et cetera, et cetera. But when that's taken away, and by the way, that's been taken away, are we human enough that we can be human to human with that teenager in front of us, or that, I don't know, 12-year-old in front of us, and we can have them be people, not players? I'm hoping that you recognize now that during this period where we're teaching virtually, may be our best time to really get relational with them, where we check on them and we make sure they're okay before we jump into the subject. I know you want to jump into the subject. For some of you, you are only comfortable talking about your baseball, your topic, your subject. But I'm telling you, what they really need is they need a human talking to them as a human. So let me remind you of something we were taught years ago by Jim Collins. Some of you listening may have read the book, Good to Great. It was a classic leadership book that came out years and years and years ago. In the book, he talks about interviewing a military officer by the name of Admiral Jim Stockdale. And what he learned from Admiral Stockdale was what he called the Stockdale Paradox. You see, Admiral Stockdale had been captured as an officer, so that was a prize catch by the North Vietnamese. And it was the Vietnam War. He spent time in a POW camp, like lots of time, years. And in this POW camp, he endured. He managed to make it out alive, and he returned home. So when Jim Collins interviewed him on that time as a prisoner of war, he asked him, what helped you make it through? And Admiral Stockdale said, I never lost hope that one day I would get through this and prevail. Well, that was a good answer. So Jim wrote it down. But then Jim Collins asked, well, who didn't make it? What was the mindset of those that didn't make it? And without batting an eye, Stockdale said, oh, that's easy. It was the optimist. And that didn't make sense. You just said you didn't lose sight of the hope that you'd get through, and yet you said the optimist didn't make it? Tell me the difference. And here's what Admiral Stockdale said that seems paradoxical, but it's brilliant. He said, I kept the end goal in mind, that however long the struggle goes on, I will make it one day. I believe I will make it. It was that belief. The optimists were the ones that said, well, by Christmas, we'll be out. And then, of course, Christmas came and left, and they weren't out of the prison camp. Well, by Easter, we'll be out. And then Easter came, and again, they weren't out. It was these people that set artificial goals or little markers that they couldn't control, and slowly but surely, hope leaked out of their brain. I believe we need to practice this paradox. Don't say silly, superficial, optimistic statements like in a few months, it'll all be over. We don't know when the vaccine's going to come out. We don't know when this thing's going to be over. But what we need to hold fast to is one day we will get through this. And Gen Z kids, you will be stronger than ever. All right, so one more practical slide, and then I want to get into what I think you'll enjoy as a finale for I hope you'll enjoy my finale as a group of teachers. In fact, some of you are going, yes, get to the finale, and it will be a highlight. Just kidding. Okay, so let's say you and I were to go back to our hypothetical Starbucks. We both got a latte, and you said, Tim, I got 5 minutes. How do I lead a meeting, or for that matter, a classroom when it's virtual? And they're feeling uneasy. They're feeling like they're not sure about this. They're not comfortable. They're not familiar, at least with me teaching them on a screen rather than in person. What do I do? Well, I want to share some thoughts with you that have been proven to be true. I have practiced these, and when I have, my meetings have gone very well with my young team, growing leaders in Atlanta, Georgia. But then I've talked to principals, I've talked to teachers, I've talked to athletic coaches, I've talked to employers of fast food restaurants that lead young people, young team members. These are the things, this is best practices that work, okay? So 3 items. Number 1, When you're leading a meeting with students in a crisis, I would say be sure to cover personal items before business items. And all I mean by that is this. You shouldn't jump straight to the schoolwork. You shouldn't jump straight to the stuff that you actually are supposed to be meeting about without first going through the hallway of, are you guys okay? Cover personal well-being before academic well-being. Here's the statement on the slide. You can see it there. If they know you care most about their personal well-being, they're going to feel secure enough to do their schoolwork. In other words, you lean in and make sure you're communicating, I care about you, then they're going to be more apt to lean into you and care about what you're teaching. Does this make sense to you? It's just a psychological principle. So you have to start, but if you'll start this way and lean into them and just say, in a sense, by this behavior, I care about you, I love you, I'm telling you, you're going to have a better performer later, I believe. Number 2, hard conversations before easy ones. By the way, this is just a good leadership principle. I have noticed if you've got both good news and bad news to share that day, to jump to the good news first starts feeling disingenuous. Like the savvy kids in your class are going to go, wait a minute, are you a spin doctor? Are you spinning this and you really are hiding something, or you're about to drop a bomb on us later? I say share the hard stuff first, the not so glitzy, not so fun news or reality. Then you get to close out your comments with maybe the fun ones or the easy ones or the good news. I'll tell you who's been really good at this is Governor Andrew Cuomo. If you've watched the national news, you've probably seen clips of the New York governor sharing about how they're doing in the most infected state in the country. If you notice, he kind of follows this principle. He'd get right into the hard facts. He'd just right up front, get real with them. And they knew he wasn't lying to them because it's bad news. But then he was able to share at the end, hey, here's how my brother Chris is doing. He just came out of infection and he's well again. Or now we got some good news. It looks like we're making progress on dropping our numbers here. I just feel like this works. Hard before easy, hard before easy, hard before easy. The last one I would share is big picture before smaller details. This is just a good leadership principle. So one of our habitudes is called puzzle pieces and box tops. You might remember this one. Have you ever tried to put together one of those gigantic jigsaw puzzles that has like 3,000 pieces in it without the box top? That's hard. It's hard enough with a box top. It's even harder without a box top. What does the box top do for you that's so helpful? I'll tell you what it is. It shares the big picture. Here's the end result. Here's what the picture looks like in totality. And then we know where to put that piece that we have in our hand. Precisely. If you'll share the big picture and give them a sense of perspective on things, then they know where their piece fits in. Then you can go, okay, now Josh, what you need to do, or Zoe, you need to, or whatever. And it just helps them understand where they fit into the scheme of things. Okay. So personal before business, hard before easy, big picture before smaller details. Okay, now it looks like I've got a little bit of time, just a few minutes. I want to do some of these habitudes that I think are going to be helpful. I'm going to need to advance a couple of slides. I'll be glad to get these to you later if you want them, but I'm going to just real quick slip through these because I want to get to some habitudes that I think will be helpful. Okay. Many of you watching right now understand what habitudes are because we even partnered with the Department of Education in Nebraska some years ago, and we created a Nebraska Educators Habitude book. So we took your 12 career-ready standards and we placed a habitude image next to each one of those standards so you could teach the principle with a picture, and because pictures are worth 1,000 words, it made it much more engaging. At least I hope it did. So I want to give you a couple of new habitudes that I think will just help, especially in the times that we're in, okay? So habitudes are images that form leadership habits and attitudes. So this first one is simply called the flight attendant factor, the flight attendant factor. Here's the principle. I don't know if any of you or many of you get to fly very much. You're not flying right now probably, but my job takes me across the globe all the time, about 100 to 125 times a year. I have noticed I do something instinctively when I'm on a flight. When we're flying through turbulence, especially, I will glance over at the flight attendant because I know if he or she is still poised, I can be poised. If they're grabbing onto the, tray or grabbing onto the, the arm of the chair or whatever, if they're looking panicked, then I panic. And the point is simply this: passengers know whether to feel panic or peace on an airplane by looking at the flight attendant. In turbulence, if the flight attendants are poised, passengers can be too. Leaders play this role. Teachers, I want you to hear me now. Your job when you get back to still an uncertain fall may be you got to play the role of a flight attendant. You need to stay poised. You need to collect yourself. And I know you'll be worried a little bit. You'll be uncertain a little bit. Be real. Let them know if you are. But I think what they need to do is see a face that says it's going to be okay. You're in turbulence right now, aren't you? You are in turbulence. So am I. We need to be the flight attendants. Love this one. This one is in Habitudes for the Journey, but I really thought it was appropriate for today. So it's simply called Toll Booths and Roadblocks. Toll Booths and Roadblocks. Toll booths and roadblocks have something in common. They're both places along the road where you have to stop. But here's the difference. When you get to a roadblock and you stop your car in front of those little fences that have orange and white paint on them, you really don't have an option. You're stuck. There's no left or right. In fact, your only option is to back up. Toll booths are different. When you come to a toll booth, you do still have to stop, but watch this. You stop, you pay a price, and you keep moving forward. I believe this is a season where some students that you teach are going to feel stuck emotionally, mentally, academically. Maybe they got injured or I don't know what happened, but don't kids all get stuck at some point? You need to remind them it's your choice if this turns out to be a roadblock or a toll booth. Are you going to pay a price and keep moving forward? Or are you going to go, well, I'm mentally stuck the rest of my life? Some people get stuck the rest of their life with a blockage. So here it is in a nutshell. I believe crises are challenging, but should be treated like toll booths, not roadblocks. We all feel stuck at some point, but we get to choose whether the experience becomes a stepping stone for our growth or a tombstone to our growth. Let me do maybe one or two more. Okay, I'm going to keep my eye on the watch. Dentists and cavities. This is one I invented just for such time as this. This is a leadership principle, but boy, if you're leading a classroom, it's just as true for you as it is for any leader of any school, business, hospital, or government. Have you ever been to the dentist before and maybe he or she saw a cavity in your mouth? Have you ever noticed the dentist will immediately say, hey, I just spotted a cavity. Can you stay a little bit longer and I can fill it right now? Or if not, can you come back as soon as possible? Now, the reason that dentist says that is because they know that if they don't fill that cavity pretty soon, bacteria is going to fill it. In other words, if they don't fill it, something else is going to fill that tooth. And so it is with the mindset of our people that we're leading. I believe when we go through uncertain times of change and turmoil, people have cavities in their minds, holes that need to be filled with accurate information. And if we don't fill those cavities, I don't mean literally, but you know what I mean. The narrative in their head is empty. They're going to fill it with inaccurate information, perhaps bad information, untrue, maybe gossip, maybe backbiting, maybe criticism. So here's the bottom line. Dentists know if they don't fill a cavity, something else will fill it. And so it is with our kids. People are down on what they're not up on. It's just a human tendency. If we don't stay up on something, we tend to start believing the worst, not the best. Not everyone, but so many people do. In times of change, always over communicate with others. You may need to find yourself communicating and communicating and communicating again. And if you don't, they're going to create narratives in their mind that are not accurate. Okay, let me do one more. Compass or GPS? Love this one. So this is Habitudes for the Journey as well, but this is really, really one of my favorites. I'm going to just not teach it, but just explain it real fast. The compass and the GPS do have something in common. They're both instruments that have to do with navigation. And Phil, in fact, up until the time that we finally got, that little GPS app on our phone, years and years and years ago, in fact, centuries ago, we were using a compass. Now, I remember getting the GPS app on my iPhone and thinking to myself, OMG, I will never get lost the rest of my life. Oh boy, was I naive. In fact, I thought my children are going to grow up in a world where they'll never, ever get lost again. Untrue. In fact, I would say in less than a month after getting my GPS, I was as lost as I could possibly be, because I was on a road trip and I happened to be in some very remote spot in Saskatchewan, Canada, where the roads were dirt and there were no names on the roads. GPS didn't help me at that point because you have to plug in an address to get anywhere. At that point, you know what I got on my iPhone? A compass. I literally have a compass on my iPhone now, because compasses work even when you're in uncharted territory. I'm going to say that again. Compasses work even when you're in uncharted territory. And when I pull out that compass, I can find true north even when there are no roads at all. Your kids are now entering uncharted territory. So are you. They're certainly going to graduate into a territory they've never been in before. All they've seen is K-12 education and preschool. They're about to graduate. I'm telling you, when my kids graduated and went off to college halfway across the country, I talked to them about their true north. I talked about the values that they were going to carry with them. Not my values, but their values. What was it they were going to embrace? And I'm telling you, it was so, so, so rich. So the bottom line here is simply this. A GPS or Google Maps will be helpful only if you're on paved roads with names on them. If you're entering new areas, you need a compass to find your true north. Similarly, kids need values to provide direction when they enter new territory. Now, I believe when you're leading your kids, you need to offer direction from wisdom, not worry, okay? You don't need to be watching the news all day long, building a fear narrative inside of you. That's not helpful. Let me tell you how parents do this, by the way. When you lead out of worry, not wisdom, you're the person that goes, don't play in traffic, you'll get hit by a car. Now, why would you need to do the worry motivation? Why couldn't you say, hey kids, when you're outside, be sure and look both ways? And better yet, why don't you just stay back from the road? It's wiser. So you're leading out of wisdom motivation, not worry motivation. We need to do this. We need to make decisions from principles, not panic. I hope that you are a principled centered leader. What are the handful of principles that you know are true regardless of hard times or easy times? Do you have some timeless principles you use? If you don't, you're much more apt to react in panic, especially in times like this. And then lastly, base your communication on facts, not fear. We need to make sure we're not just drawing our latest updates from a social media post that God knows if it's even accurate. You get the point. Okay, I see my time is up. We need to take a few minutes to do some Q&A. So I'm not sure if I need to unshare. Drew, what do I need to do? Or who is it that I need to talk to?
Hi, Tim. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
All right. So we have time for, we'll try to get a couple questions in. Again, great presentation, lots of compliments in the Q&A. And so one of the questions that we see here, what pointers do you have for our different generations of teachers to relate to Generation Z?
Good. Okay. This probably deserves an hour response. I'll try to give it 1 minute and do a good job. First of all, you may notice if you're Gen X that even though you didn't necessarily remember any pandemics in your past, you remember tougher times. So I would say what you need to do is remember how it felt and identify with them. Now, if you were a boomer or a millennial and you're going, I don't remember feeling this way at all, I was very confident and very hopeful, what you may need to do is borrow from your heart and say, I need to give the hope I have to them because they need it. So you're not necessarily going, I know exactly how you feel. You may not be able to say that with sincerity. Don't be disingenuous, but offer what you have. If you can identify them with them, do it. And if you have hope and they don't, share it. I don't know if that's a good answer, but that would be what I would be tending to want to do in that situation.
All right, and we have time for about one more question. And so you mentioned this a little bit at the beginning, but could you elaborate on, do you see the coronavirus/pandemic being the start to a new generational beginning? Several are hearing it called Gen Z.
Yeah, I do. But I think it's going to depend. I mean, the outcome is going to depend on how well we lead them. So I did a blog post recently where I talk about the potential negative ramifications or outcomes of this time that we're in, and the positives, depending on how the narrative they begin to form in their head. So the possible negative outcomes, if we don't lead them well, might be that anxiety even goes deeper. They always feel postponed. They never feel like they can recover. They might keep a scarcity mindset. You follow what I'm saying? But if we lead them well, and maybe we teach them what past generations did when they went through tough times, how they developed grit, how they developed endurance, how they developed gratitude for having become stronger. I'm telling you, we may see Gen Z respond in a crazy cool way. I'll give you a good example. I get teary and emotional when I think of how many college students I have heard of recently switch their major in college to nursing because they've been watching healthcare workers become heroes. And I'm not saying they all need to become nurses and doctors, but they've been watching this crazy thing on TV and they thought, that's a place I could really do something that matters. So they don't have to do that, but I'm just saying, what if we help them form what's a good response? By the way, do you all remember September 11th, 2001? How many millennials were running to ground zero trying to make a difference? They were joining the army. They were changing their jobs and so forth because they wanted to do something that mattered. So I'm thinking maybe we can lead these kids to a place where they can do something like that. This is not a sales pitch because there's nothing to sell here, but can I share two things that are free that you might want to take advantage of? We developed for this very time something called home chats. When you're at home with your kids or at home and you're leading your students, home chats are 5 free habitudes that start conversations we feel like need to be had in this time to make sure they come through on the positive side of things. So if you went to growingleaders.com, that's our website, and you looked up home chats, you can see that you can download those 5 free images with activities, discussion questions, etc. And then also I would just say a number of things I shared in this time, I posted on a blog. I'd love to stay in touch with people I get to be with. If you'd like to follow the blog, you sure can. It's growingleaders.com/blog, and you can subscribe there. Thank you for letting me be with you. It's been my honor. I love you all, CTE teachers in Nebraska. I hope to get to see you face to face sometime in the future.